Hello and welcome back to Autistic FM. I'm Haje, your host, pronouns he, him, and I'm thrilled to share this journey with you today. You can subscribe to Autistic FM at your favorite podcasting platform, and doing so really helps us grow and continue exploring these important conversations. Over on our website on autistic.fm, you can access episode transcripts, you can join in on the discussion threads about our episodes, and you can engage with a vibrant neurospicy community, and so much more. And all of that is completely free. If you'd like to show a little bit of extra support, consider joining our supporter community for as little as $5 a month. Not only will you get sneak previews and a chance to submit questions to our guests, but you'll also gain access to special discussion groups and other exclusive perks. We've got a ton of other exciting benefits on the way. In this episode, I'm thrilled to welcome Bekkah, also known online as Autism Beccah. Bekkah speaks candidly about her neurodivergent journey, which began with advocating for her children's needs and eventually led to her own autism diagnosis. We get into a lot of different topics, including the challenges of having a late diagnosis, navigating family dynamics, and the intricacies of recovering from burnout, along with the nuances of mental health challenges like anxiety and PTSD. Bekkah's insights of finding peace amidst chaos and balancing life with sensory needs are enlightening, heartwarming, and I know that I say this almost every time, but to date, this is one of my favorite episodes. Before we get started, a quick trigger warning. We touched on a bunch of sensitive topics, including mental health struggles, childhood trauma, and the experience of grief and loss. Please do take care of yourself while listening. And with all of that covered, let's roll the tape. Hello and welcome back to Autistic FM. I am joined by a guest who has been in my periphery since day one of this podcast, and I'm so joyous that they're joining us on this journey today. My lovely guest, what are your name and pronouns?
My name is Bekkah, or Autism Beccah online, and I go by she, her, they, them. Either works.
Wonderful. Where in the world are you?
I am in Maine, USA.
Awesome. You're right across the country from me. I'm in California. And I am curious, what is your experience with neurodivergence? I feel like if your name online is Autism Beccah, maybe that's a hint, but let's get to it.
I've got a lot of experience with neurodivergence. I'm an autism mom, and that's where my journey started, was with my children, and specifically my youngest, who was diagnosed about 10-ish years ago, and it was my awakening. It took about 10 years and 3 different doctors for them to take my concerns seriously and send me for formal diagnosis. I was formally diagnosed this past fall in 2024 with autism, among other things. I also deal with CPTSD, anxiety, OCD, ARFID, and so many others.
It's a proper alphabet soup you got there.
Yes, quite an alphabet soup.
Yeah. You mentioned 3 doctors. That sounds like quite a stressful and confusing journey of getting to where you are. Would you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the first doctor was actually not one of my own. It was my youngest son's specialist. And he, for those who don't know, he is pretty severe on the spectrum. He's level 2 to 3. And has high support needs. He's mostly nonverbal. And for those who have children with similar support needs, you probably understand, especially in the younger years, that it was much harder. So we were doing different therapies every day, 5 days a week, seeing specialists and everything. And I think because we were so interactive with his specialists at that time that she happened to notice my autistic traits. And she was the first person to mention, we're starting to understand that autism is a genetic thing and you are showing some signs. If you want, I'll write you a doctor's note. I can't help you because I work with kids, but this is what we can do. And I was so freaked out, honestly. Like my first reaction was like, oh, but I'm married. But I have kids, and I just cannot wrap around the fact that it was okay. You can still be autistic and do those things. And she just looked at me and was like, yeah, but I wasn't ready. But that was the start. That was the little seed that was planted. And eventually I went to another doctor who told my doctor at the time. I eventually just mentioned it, and he was like, there's no way. So fast forward, I moved to a different state where I am now in Maine. And another provider, I fell into what I believe was burnout, was like one of the first parts of my burnout anyways. And this provider told me that, sure, you are definitely autistic. I know you well enough to say that, but why bother getting a diagnosis? And so I was put off from pursuing it further. And because of some of my medical trauma, I didn't want to push it with her. So finally, I get very sick, and this lady closes her office. And by very sick, neurological Lyme disease, which is something I've struggled with since 2021 and around this time. Back to it, I go to a new doctor, and it took me 3 years to build up a good rapport with him and trust him. And just this past summer, I was very sick with neurological Lyme disease again. It was affecting my brain. I had to stim more. I was unable to verbally communicate. It was a very difficult, confusing, and scary, quite frankly, time. I was just terrified. And so I came to him one day, and the only thing that I could get out verbally was, obviously, I'm autistic. And he took a good look at me and was like, I think you need antibiotics again, but I think we should explore this. And the relief that I felt was just amazing. He sent me to a psychiatrist who diagnosed me right away. And then I saw a second diagnosis from a different specialist, I should say, in December of 2024. So I've confirmed it several times verbally and twice formally on paper by two different doctors.
Wow, that's a lot. One thing I was actually really curious about was you mentioned that the first doctor or the first provider who mentioned that you might be autistic, you mentioned that you had an emotional reaction to that and that you weren't ready. Could you say a little bit about the emotional experience you had of that? Because that sounds intense.
Yes, it really was. At the time, I had just moved back to my home state of Michigan, and I had already been through a nasty divorce and remarried, and we were relocating to be closer to my ex and my kids. So it was a very tumultuous time for the family in general. And that was about the time that I learned that my oldest two had been diagnosed with either ADHD, autism, or both. My oldest son was actually one of the first, I believe, to be dual diagnosed ADHD and autistic, so ADHD, as I like to say. And then I find out that my third is diagnosed with autism, and finally my fourth, who is the most severe, my youngest son, like I had explained. I had a very different idea, number one, of what autism was. I grew up thinking the same that everybody else did, that it was mostly a boys' disorder, that it was rare for girls, and that I just had this picture of my son Will, who was nonverbal and not potty trained and all of these things. And I was like, there's no way. How could I be autistic? And I think that's where my reaction came from. But I'm married, but I have a job. I have kids. Like, what are you talking about? How can this be possible? And she was like, it's okay. It's okay. But if you decide later, let me know. But I will say that I did have a very like emotional reaction to my youngest diagnosis as well, because it was a long time coming and something that I guess we knew in the back of our hearts, but the future was just so uncertain. And to me, it felt like my past and my future both were so uncertain. And that's what led me to that reaction.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. Just for context, could you tell me your kids' ages?
My kids right now are anywhere from 13 to 20. And then I have a bonus daughter, not biological, but I love her with all my heart. And she is around 20 years old as well. I had my kids very young. So being 36 with a 20, soon to be 21-year-old.
Yeah. So I'm curious, it feels like you have now 4 kids who are diagnosed with autism, and all of them have pretty different presentations, as far as I'm understanding from you. So I feel like you have more than most a pretty deep understanding of what the spectrum part of ASD means, right? If everybody has slightly different needs and presentations and that kind of stuff. Has it struck you how big the differences are and how wide that spectrum goes? And what are your thoughts around that?
Honestly, it didn't really resonate with me in that way until my diagnosis, until the pieces clicked in my head. Because as I've said on my own channel, I've known for about 10 years that I was probably autistic. And it was only until recently that like all of these things made sense. And it wasn't until my diagnosis that I really took a good look at everybody. And I don't know if it's some kind of superpower that you're imbued with once you get formally diagnosed or you've done your self assessment and you realize, but you can see neurodivergence in everyday life. You can see it everywhere. And suddenly I realized that so many of what I thought were my normal quirky Bekkah traits were actually autistic traits. And one of my kids is more severe. He can't communicate verbally for the most part. He's a Gestalt learning processor and has difficulty with everyday things. My oldest is ADHD and leans more towards the ADHD part. So he can hold a job. He graduated from school. He can communicate just fine, but he struggles a lot with executive dysfunction and like memory stuff and neurological. He also has hypermobility. A couple of my kids also have ARFID along with me. And I realized also with this whole thing that my parents and some of my grandparents were also neurodivergent. So it was really just like a big awakening for me.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned ARFID a couple of times. For people who don't know what that is, would you share?
Yes, it means avoidant and restrictive intake food disorder. And while a lot of social media platforms discourage you from talking about it because they consider it an eating disorder, and on some level, I get that. But there are three different types of ARFID. There's the fear kind, say you choke on a chicken bone and now you're afraid to eat. There's the disinterest type, where you're just not interested in food in general. And then there's one more type.
Sensory.
Sensory, yeah, it's more about sensory and textures and stuff. And my family absolutely carries the latter two, the sensory and disinterest types.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I have a close friend of mine two friends actually. One who is just, I wish I could just take a pill and have all my nourishment because I do not give any shits about food. And I'm a huge foodie. Like I'm a sensory seeker when it comes to food. And so I'm like on the other extreme of that. But I'm like, oh, that is what a spectrum means. You don't care. And I passionately care, but we're actually two sides of the same coin there. The fear thing is interesting. I definitely have some friends who are like, the food needs to be liquid because they're scared of choking. So yeah, I think we could do a whole episode on ARFID. Let's not do that today because we have other stuff to talk about. But thank you for the quick diversion. How does ARFID show up for you if you're willing to talk about it a little bit?
For me, I eat very beige. I eat what everybody calls bland or flavorless food. And I also eat very specific foods. Every day I have my smoothie at breakfast. And if I go to work, I have strawberry waffles or pancakes from the freezer. If I'm at home, I have granola bars. And then I have some fruit maybe. And then dinner. And dinner could be like one of 10 different things. And that's how ARFID is for me. And it's funny because my oldest, who also has the same types of ARFID as I do, he also sensory seeks, similar to you. He prefers very hot stuff. But like on the other hand, he also has some very hardcore, like, no, this is not my food type of a thing.
Yeah. I have memories of some of that as a kid and be like, oh, and I think I'm quite a bit older than you. And the parenting style was very much try everything once, right? And then once I've eaten it once and realized it didn't kill me, I was like, I still don't love this, but I guess I can choke it down kind of thing. But I'm now realizing that a lot of my food, I'm an omnivore, but at the same time, there's definitely stuff I have preferences for and stuff I'd rather not. So yeah, it's fascinating. Anyway, let's park that because I want to have a guest on at some point to talk about this for a whole episode. What we were going to talk about was you've been very open about sharing your coming out of a tail end, hopefully, of a stretch of burnout. And I wanted to talk about that. Would you share the arc of like, how did you notice you were going into burnout and what is the experience like for you?
To be honest, I didn't know that I was going into burnout until I was in a really bad way, until I was like autistic burnout meets mental health crisis meets I don't even know. I explained with neurological Lyme. I got very sick. It affected my nervous system. I'm like weak in my arms and some other issues. So between that and I've been the main provider for my household for many years, and I'm always worried about something or another. And just like you add all of those little things on top of each other, and eventually, whether you have autism or not, you need rest. You need to recoup and regenerate. And after my diagnosis, I guess like everybody goes through at some point, especially those who have late diagnoses, I went through a stage of grief, just trying to figure out my past, my present. I'm a high masker and a fawner, and like trying to figure out what that meant for me. All of these things on top of being sick and not having a break and being a mom and a provider and a caregiver, and it was just so much. I had to learn very quickly within the last couple of months to let things go and to allow myself to rest. And the only way that I can describe like what I was feeling is to say that I felt called to rest, and I felt allowed to rest for the first time in my life. I was also parentified as a child, and then I had kids when I was young. So it's been a constant go thing for me my entire life. And it was really difficult, but I was able to. And that's where I think my burnout started many years ago, and I just got to the worst point of it now.
What does rest look like for you?
Resting my sensory issues, taking, or I should say, taking care of my sensory needs, being in a darker, calmer space, a quieter space, being able to have my plushies and other sensory things, being in my sensory swing, laying in bed and reading, just figuring out my autistic needs, but also resting and not worrying so much about the chores of the house, which was part of my OCD. So I'd always freak out about the chores and the bills and whose appointment is when. Like it was just a constant flow. And so I finally allowed myself to let a lot of things go and to rest and to not worry about striving to be this perfect masked person.
Did it work? Like, are you feeling like it's working?
I think it is working. I would say that I'm not on the other side of burnout yet. I don't think I will be, if I'm being honest, for a while. I think I'm going to be here for another 6 months or a year, but I feel like I'm on the other side of it. Like, I feel like I'm finally starting to move up the hill again to who I am.
You walk through the bottom of the valley, now you get to clamber the way up the other side kind of thing.
Yeah. But it's not as hard. It's not as hard at all.
Yeah. I feel like I've been there a couple of times, and when things start getting easier, I put more load on myself again and I slip back down. How do you stop yourself from relapsing?
I think relapsing is part of the process. I think honestly, it is just part of the process. And just the idea of relapsing is part of what makes us go into burnout. We're so worried about failure, and there's so many things on our shoulders, perceived or actual. So I'm not so worried about having my activity and being able to do things, but then regressing again or anything like that. But I do know that while I am having like some better energy levels and more into my special interests right now, if I do go back into more of a restful place where I'm not posting as much or doing as much, I'll be okay with that. I will, because I know that this is a process and I will get there.
Mm-hmm. Goodness. I've had a really hard 6 months, maybe hard year. And like what you're saying resonates with me really deeply. I think for me, what ended up happening was that I lost one of my closest friends and co-founders. She died pretty suddenly. And, she was the co-founder of my business. And so when she passed away, like my business just really suffered. And so when I finally resurfaced, I was like, oh shit, I haven't made any money for 3 months. I'm just fully living off savings. And I am exhausted and I'm not productive and I'm not really a functional human being right now. And eventually somebody asked me, like, hey, does that sound like burnout to you? And I was like, oh shit, yeah, that's what's going on here. And a course correction, I moved house and I found myself a job, like a full-time job. And the house move was horrific, like truly, truly horrendous. Everything is different. I feel yeah, everything was very hard with that. And then the new job is exciting, but a new job is a lot of change. And so I'm in this mode of needing rest, but also feeling really restless when I rest. I don't know how to, I don't know how to rest. Like what advice would you give to somebody like me? Or what would you tell me is like, here's how to rest? I feel like whenever I'm just sitting doing nothing, like my rest, it turns out, is just playing dumb video games on my phone. And giving myself permission to do that feels important, but it also feels like I have this, and I can't tell if that's an internal or an external influence, but it feels like my life is just sagging away. And what a depressing feeling that is. And so I feel guilty about resting. Anyway, that was a lot of things. How does all of that land on you?
My advice to you is to look at it as an investment in yourself, that you're already doing so much of your own shadow work or whatever. You realize that all of these changes and the loss of a friend, which I'm so sorry, and business partner, like I can't imagine. You recognize that all of these things are affecting you, and it is a lot of change. Like I don't even want to move my bedroom around, let alone move to a different house. So I can't imagine, or I can because I have been there, all of these things layered on top of yourself, and taking rest, if that's in the form of video games, watching TV, coloring, finding some kind of a sit down, low energy hobby. Those are, to me, perfectly good uses of your time, because you are investing in yourself, your wellness, your health, and you are trying to get back to the best that you can be. And sometimes, on the other hand, the best that you can be isn't always what you were before or tip top. It's okay. And what will be.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like all my hobbies have always been to some degree productive, like photography, but I never really took photos for me. I always took photos for internet points or for impressing other people or whatever. And being able to go deep on something I care about. I think actually this podcast is one of the examples of something that I'm like, hey, this is something I'm doing for me. And most of my friends don't really understand. Like most of my real life friends don't really understand. And that's fine. Like I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for me. And in the process, I found a whole community that does care about this. And that's been really interesting to have that as like, oh, like I didn't set out for this to be productive, but it's turning out to have an impact on people. And that feels really good. I don't really even know where I'm going with this, but I guess I'm just talking out loud about the hobbies I do have that do feel like rest. But the other thing is, it's not just rest. It's also like editing and putting content out there. And like every now and again, I skip an episode or skip a week. And then I'm like, oh, I'm letting the listeners down. I'm like, no, I think like if you are a listener and you were let down by me not releasing an episode for a week, fuck you. I don't care. I really don't care. Because I'm not doing it for my listeners, right? I'm doing this for me and I'm trying to put out episodes when I have a new thing I want to put out there. And the fun thing is I have so many interesting guests I want to talk to. So that part is relatively straightforward, but it's also like I want to shed that sense of responsibility at the same time.
And that's hard.
That's so hard.
And I know that because in my real life job, I'm the social media lady. YouTube or talk, whatever, that is my job. And it's been hard. And I think part of the reason why I stepped away from recording over the winter was because I was having a hard time separating the job from the fun.
Mhm.
And I always say, like, where customer service Bekkah stops and regular Bekkah begins.
I think the phrase joy among the chaos, like that just made my central nervous system send all sorts of signals up and down my spine. Say more about what that phrase means to you, because I feel like that just lit something up in me.
We are vibing today. I'm so glad that we got to talk, number one. And number two, I told you earlier that I was parentified as a child, that I was made, I loved my parents, but when they split up, my dad didn't have a woman to help him run the household. He didn't have another partner in that comes to
Right.
everything, to just kind of suck it up and deal with it and carry on. And I have found that to be just in general, like what's expected of me throughout my life.
I'm noticing for me, it's become my garden. Like the new place I live in has this really weird little, it feels like the secret garden from the Never-Ending Story, because the only way to get to it is through a door in my bedroom. Like it's got like a deck and a little bit of a garden, and I've put my hammock out there and all that kind of stuff. And this garden, I've always liked growing stuff, but I've never really considered myself a gardener. But here, if I have 5 minutes between meetings, I'll go outside and I'll pluck some weeds, or I water it, or I talk to the plants or whatever. And I feel like having it becomes meditative, and having little moments of joy throughout that way has become really important. And I wasn't really expecting that, but it's such a good perk. And of course, it helps being in California where the weather is just absolutely delightful. But it's been, yeah, it's become a really important part of me finding something to park my brain for a few minutes.
I
Yeah.
really do. I think not just with change, but anyone who's neurodivergent on the autism spectrum, ADHD, we also have issues with transitions, and going from one change to another, whether it's big or small, is difficult. Even at work, I've only just realized like how many transitions I have to make from the car to my office to getting started. So when I start getting overwhelmed by all of that, I whip out one of my books on my Kindle and I read a chapter, and that kind of centers me again. And it sounds like you found your garden. Your garden is helping you to center yourself, even just a little bit for a few minutes in between things.
Yeah, and I think the piece that I'm discovering about this is the first time I've had a real job in a very long time. And the thing I'm learning is that going from a call to taking notes from the call to writing a to-do list from the things I needed to do from a call, then actually doing the things, like those are all transitions, and they're just so expensive. And I've taken just putting Slack on do not disturb, because I'm like, look, if I'm doing work and you like just ask me a quick question or whatnot, that ruins my afternoon of doing the thing that I'm meant to be doing. And I think for me, it's one of the concessions I need is to actually just tell people, look, when I'm doing work, I'm doing work. Feel free to book. Like, I report directly to the CEO, and the CEO put something on my calendar, and I was just in work. I didn't notice. And he pinged me on Slack. I was like, hey, I've been sitting here for 8 minutes. I was like, oh God, sorry. And he was like, yeah, it's fine. And so we had a little conversation about that. And I was like, look, I'm like, I would love to do good work, but when I'm doing work, I just vanish into the work. And that's what you want from me, right? That is one of my superpowers. And it was a really good little conversation to, it was a really good little conversation to have is, look, the reason you hired me is that I am able to hyperfocus, but then we also need to let me hyperfocus. And I think that was a really good realization to have. I'm in Silicon Valley. Like, this is not an uncommon thing. There's lots of people who like to disappear into code and kind of be zoned in or locked in or whatever. But yeah, the thing I'm realizing is that I need to actually design that space into my day and week in order to be able to do good work that I actually enjoy doing. Yeah. You mentioned you work in as a social media something or other. How well suited is your work to you as a person?
I love it. I love what I do. I've been working for a small business, a kratom company here in Maine since 2014, almost since the beginning. I think this is why I feel for you for your loss, because it's been me and my bestie working together at her small business for many years. And I, if I were to lose her, I can just imagine. But I haven't always been the social media lady. I started off as the webmaster, as the web girl. I designed their websites for many years. And it was great for me to be able to hyper focus and do my thing that way. And with social media, it's the same. I do a lot of designing and videos, and now I have my own little, I call it my cubby, but it's my own little office upstairs away from everybody. And I'm just able to do my job. And so it really worked out.
Was your cubby something you had to advocate for?
At first, because while we work in a very large building, for the most part, all of us office ladies, we were all in one area. And I was having a hard time working. I've worked every position there, everything from the packing room, packing our products, to doing customer service. And that was my main job for many years before I switched to social media and web design or graphic design. But during that switch, when they said, I think it is time that we officially get a social media person, does anybody want that? Nobody wanted to touch that, but I was like, hey,
I'm
right
here.
here.
Did you already have your own personal social media thing, or was that a completely new thing for you?
It was not new. I
Okay.
used to do beauty. I had a beauty channel back in the day before I started becoming chronically ill.
Yeah. So you mentioned you've been doing this for 10 years, but I also feel like you moved around a bit. Were you able to do it remotely for a while, or?
Yes. And actually, me and my bestie, we met on Facebook. I was living in California. I used to live in the Bay Area and then South Lake Tahoe after that.
Mhm.
And how I got my job was, I'm also a cancer survivor. I survived cervical cancer shortly after I had my last son. And I was in a point where I couldn't work, and I was using the products that we sell basically. And I had put it out there that I would be willing to help other companies, and I would just be willing to help the community and keep myself busy. And somebody recommended my services, knowing that I was a web designer and did stuff like that. And we became best friends very quickly, and I
Mhm.
started doing their websites, and they kept finding things for me to do, and they kept me on over the years. I didn't even move to Maine until 2018, so I
Mhm.
had worked from home for 4 years at that point.
Amazing. Like, I feel like the story of somebody hanging on to a job for 10 years and being autistic, that feels rare.
I think it is, but it's part of my special interests. Like, I really
Mhm.
enjoy designing and being creative. And my bestie is very family first, and she understands me. And she's had a lot of the same experiences. So we connected on many levels, and this just worked out for all of us really well.
Mhm. Amazing. I think that's like the exception, right? Somebody who is able to align their special interests with something they do for a living and then also finds a company who's willing to accept their idiosyncrasies or their accommodation needs. That's super important and super helpful.
And they do. They're very great about accommodating me. And anytime my kid has a need, or if I'm sick, I can't go into work, there's no questions asked. If I need to take a break at work, there's no questions asked. We all support each other. And I think we are very lucky to have such a diverse and neurodiverse team, and such an understanding and caring team. We all really do care about each other. Something that you wouldn't find in a bigger company often.
Yeah. And so how has that been to find the intersection between your burnouts and your presumably needing a lot more time and work? Have you been open with work about where you're at and all that?
Oh, yeah. Yep. We're always discussing our own health issues. And I think that's why things are so accepting there, and they give us so much grace because they understand. And I honestly don't think if I wasn't working here or maybe another small business with similar things, like I don't think I would have been able to keep the same job.
Amazing. I don't want to ask you about your job specifically if you're not interested in disclosing that, but I'm curious if the industry you're in isn't somehow related to health.
No, we can't give medical advice or recommend products based on medical information, but Kratom is very popular across America with adults, especially middle-aged to retirement age for many reasons. And historically, Kratom itself has been used where it comes from in Southeast Asia for hundreds, if not thousands of years as like a coffee alternative. A lot of
Right.
studying on that. And so like the business itself, everything from the kratom and the other herbs, the teas, and to
Hmm.
my love of social media and designing, like it all just works so well.
Interesting. I love that. Thank you for sharing. So the burnout itself, it sounds like you needed rest more than anything. Was there anything else that helped you? Did you find diet changes or medicine, or was there anything else other than rest that helped you get back on track?
Yes, a very understanding psychiatrist who, like I said, I deal with neurological issues as well. Part of the reason that I went into burnout was that that was part of the problem. And
Hmm.
so that has helped as well.
Yeah, for sure. Would you, and feel free not to answer this, what medicine ended up helping you?
Lorazepam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It helps with anxiety and panic attacks. And it especially helps my nervous system. Medication helps a lot. And before that, meditation and things like that. I was using everything that I had at my disposal to try and get through it, but it was very difficult.
Yeah, it sounds it. I'm glad you were able to get help, and especially finding neuro-affirming help is challenging. I remember a while ago, I went on a journey to trying to find a therapist who would be neuro-affirming, and it's been hard. It's been incredibly hard. And I actually recently found a therapist who doesn't know that much about autism, but has been able to meet me exactly where I need to be met, which has been a real epiphany, to be honest with you. How did you find this provider? How did you go about finding somebody who was able to help you?
Where I'm at is very small town, but I continued to see her afterwards. She has so many letters and dots after her name. It's not even funny.
Right.
She's very educated and also very open, so that helped.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. If somebody were to come to you and say, hey, do you have some tips, tricks, advice for burnout? Where would you nudge them towards, or where would you start?
I would start by saying to start figuring out what you can let go. Because when you're in burnout, it's because there's too much. There's too much on you, and you've pushed through it for so long that you are just slowly burning out. So the first thing to do is to try and figure out what you can let go. And sometimes that's not a lot. Like I can't unmask at work, but I can at home. So I can
Right.
do that in my safe space in my room here. I don't have to do chores every day. I could do them every weekend or every other weekend.
Right.
Things like that. Just little things. And also when you're ready, because it took a long time for me to be, but when you're ready, ask for help. And if you'd be surprised how many people you don't think are willing to help, but are willing to help with things for you.
Mhm. So asking for help is an interesting one for me personally, and I'd like your thoughts on this. Like asking for help in general is hard, right? So that's start one. But the thing that's even harder is I don't even know what to ask for. Like, how do you know what to ask for? I'm burned out. I am like at the last, I'm running on fumes. But it takes executive functioning to figure out what to ask for. And if I get that depleted, I don't want to ask. I don't know how to ask, but I also don't know what to ask for. How do you start? Where do you help?
I started with the things that were bothering me the most. Well,
Right.
I have basically 3 days at home and 1 day of work, 2 days at home, 1 day of work. So I have a lot of grace there. So there's just a lot of little things. And making a list. I'm a list maker. I don't know about you, but I love
Yeah.
this. And just figuring out like my responsibilities or what I think are my responsibilities. And I have learned just by making those lists and following my heart, doing my research, and diving more into my special interests, which are also very therapeutic for me. I found out that there were a lot of things that I thought I was responsible for that I'm not, or that should be a shared responsibility, but I'm taking it on myself. And it's difficult to let go, but it was a process and I was able to.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really wonderful. I promised I would take only an hour of your time, and as much as I would love to sit here for another hour, I have a couple of questions that I love to close these interviews with. And the first one is, what do you wish neurotypical folks knew about autism?
That it looks different for all of us, that not to judge a book by its cover, to be so simplistic about it, but I'm considered high masking and high functioning because I can speak and I can at least fake some social stuff. But on the other hand, there are so many other ways that my autism and other things disable me. And a lot of neurotypical people tend to have the idea that we can just push through things and something like that. But I think we're coming to an awakening of neurodivergence, of chronic illness and invisible illness specifically. And I think people are starting to see that.
Yeah, thank you. And would you tell me of a time when you were seen and loved exactly the right way for you?
I think this is the first question you've asked me that I don't have something right away. Every time that I have had 4 soulmates in my life, and by that, best friends, not romantically, but just pieces of my soul that were meant to be. We were meant to be in each other's life at some point, and I always felt that with these 4 women. And they all understood me, whether they knew that I had autism or other issues, whether they admitted it, whether they talked about it or pointed it out. Like they never had to do any of that. They just got me and I just got them. And it was those moments that I felt the most seen, loved, and the most able to see others and love others as well.
Thank you for sharing that. Bekkah, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. The timing of this call, the timing of this interview is absolutely perfect. And you've given me a lot to think about, and I adore you for it. Thank you so much.
I adore you too. You are doing an awesome job in getting the word out about autism and neurodivergence and just getting other people's experiences out there. I think is going to be so helpful for all of us. So thank you for what you do as well.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Autistic FM. We love hearing from you, so be sure to follow us on TikTok at Autistic FM, on Instagram at autistic_FM, and dive deeper into the conversations by visiting our website at autistic.fm, where you can subscribe for free, join discussions about each episode, and even suggest some guests for future shows. This podcast is lovingly produced and hosted by me, Haje Kamps, and skillfully edited by Sean Portillo. It's been a delight to share this discussion with you, and, see you next week.